So I have a koan for you today. We talk a fair amount here, and we're talking a little bit last week about the sort of stereotypical Zen teacher who's very remote, very tough, and will spare no slaps or insults to get you to enlightenment. And that made me think about this particular story, and as a contrast, this is a talk which I had a note on it that I'd given it before when I was in Finland, and I think I've given it here as well, but I think it was in session. So that's a somewhat limited audience. So I thought I'd give it again to a bigger group. This session comes from Transmission of the Light, which is the stories of the enlightenments of all the masters in our lineage. So the star of this is Tōzan, also known in Chinese as Dangshan. And he was studying with the teacher Guishan, and his teacher was, they were talking about the teachings of the insentient. It means how do things that are not animals or people, how do they teach? You know, there's Dogen has a whole chapter on the teachings of the insentient. Something like the streams are the long, broad tongues of the Dharma, and so they preach the 84,000 hymns and so on and so forth. So he's dealing with his master about those issues, and he doesn't get it. So at a certain point he says goodbye to his teacher, Guishan, and goes off to study with another teacher. So the koan that we're going to talk about today takes place with this other teacher. It says, finally Dangshan left Guishan and went to Yunnan. Bringing up the preceding events, he asked, who can hear the teachings of the insentient? Yunnan said, the inanimate can hear it. Dangshan asked, why don't I hear it? Yunnan raised his whisk, that's the ceremonial thing with a horse's tail on it that Zen masters sometimes carry, raised his whisk and said, do you hear? Meaning, do you hear the teachings of the whisk? Dangshan said, no. Yunnan said, if you don't even hear my teaching, how could you hear the teachings of the inanimate? Or the insentient, another way of saying that. Dangshan said, what scripture contains the teachings of the inanimate? Yunnan said, haven't you read where the infinite light scripture says, rivers, birds, trees, and groves all invoke the Buddha and the teaching? At this, Dangshan had an awakening. So he finally he's got a piece of this teaching here. After expressing his understanding, Dangshan said to Yunnan, I still have residual habits that have not yet been exhausted. Yunnan said, what have you done? Dangshan said, I don't even practice the holy truths. Yunnan said, are you happy? Dangshan said, yes. It is as though I have found a jewel in a trash heap. So what we're concerned with here is not so much the koan. We're not going to take up the first part, but I'm concerned with the second part of it, the conversation that comes after. So we'll take a look at that, see what it might have to say to us. So here we have, which is a little unusual, two teachers in one koan. Guishan is now counted as a patriarch of the Rinzai school. He's not really in our lineage. But Dangshan Tōzan is one of the founders of the Soto school. That's where you get the To. It comes from the first part of his name, Tōzan. He was a monk for 42 years and died at 83, a very famous teacher in his own right as time went on. Yunyan had become a monk at age 16. His teacher was Hakujo, or Baizang in Chinese. He was the most influential of Yunyan's teachers and gave him transmission. So this is the person he's just had an insight with. He died before Yunyan was, Baizhang died before Yunyan was fully enlightened, and then Yunyan left his teacher as Tōzan has just done, and traveled to many other teachers, and finally he was satisfied with his own understanding. So Dangshan did not understand the teachings of his former teacher, Guishan, so he travels to Yunyan. He inquires about the same teaching, and this time he gets a somewhat different answer. So let's speak about this conversation after he understands part of this teaching. In the first part of the conversation, Dangshan expresses his doubts. Remember that he had just had a breakthrough. He's just had an awakening. But what he's expressing here, immediately after are his doubts. He says, I still have residual habits that have not yet been exhausted. So this is kind of interesting. He's realized something that he struggled with two different teachers. Is he as you might think he would be, euphoric, filled with a new confidence? No. He immediately expresses his doubts and a sense of his own unworthiness. I still have residual habits that have not yet been exhausted. So all of you who have not yet had an experience anywhere near what you might call enlightenment, realization, or a breakthrough, you probably imagine that if you ever did, you would feel comfortable and confident in any Dharma situation. You'd always understand the teachings thereafter. You'd always know how to say a word of Zen in any situation. And you think that all your worst characteristics and behavior would be gone. In this lineage, we've probably disabused you of the idea that you would be perfect, without flaw. But at least you think you'd get rid of the big ugly stuff. But Dangshan is asking about exactly the kind of things you would think might be gone. He calls them residual habits. So what does he mean by this phrase, residual habits? What is it he's talking about here? He's talking about his karma. He's talking about what sometimes is referred to in the vow of atonement as ancient twisted karma. This is what we do during the Jukai service. At the beginning we all do the vow of atonement. Traditionally it goes, all evil karma ever committed by me since of old because of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thoughts. Now I atone for it all. We do a slightly updated version. I now declare my responsibility for all careless actions which I have committed in the past. These actions sprang from my greed, anger, and ignorance and were expressed by my body, speech, and thought. I am accountable for them all. That's our version, but means essentially the same thing. In the Bodhisattva vow, which we chant during session services, this ancient twisted karma is expressed in a slightly different way. That sutra says, they, meaning other human beings, they are the merciful messengers of the awakened ones who use devices to emancipate us from blind tendencies produced and accumulated upon ourselves by our own egoistic delusion and attachment through countless cycles of space and time. So whether you call them residual habits or blind tendencies, these are a way of thinking about emotional patterns Often we're only partially aware of what our own emotional patterns are. And one of the things that Zen practice is designed to do is to shine the light of attention on them so that they become conscious. These kinds of habits and behaviors that we're talking about here are the deep bargains that we've made with the world. I'll give up ever asking for anything for myself in my relationships if I never have to be brave enough to express anger or hear anyone else's anger. It's one kind of bargain you can make. I'll serve others and be helpful to everyone as long as I never have to risk being hurt by asking for anything for myself and risk not getting it. So there are all sorts of emotional patterns and knots that we tie ourselves into. These are very deep and unconscious bargains that we all make, and we all live by, mostly without realizing it. So what Tōzan's talking about here when he talks about residual habits, he's talking about his jealousy, his greed, his anger, his hatred, his fear, and all the rest of the things that humans have and are ashamed of. The logic that he implies here is that he can't be enlightened as long as these things are still with him. You see, he's just had a breakthrough, but he realizes he's not all better. And perhaps he further implies that neither should anyone he considers enlightened retain any of these things. So it's a way he's judging himself. You have to be pretty perfect here to have had a realization. And anyone out there that I think has had a realization has to be pretty perfect too, or I'll reject them. But in this ordinary mind school, one of the things that we try to be pretty clear about is that the flawed human being is who gets enlightened. And he or she remains flawed, even in enlightenment. And though we don't become perfect, we do become more conscious and humble about our flaws. And sometimes we're able to work more skillfully with them and do less harm to ourselves and to other people. There may be residual habits we have that fade away, and then they're just not problems anymore. But it's never all of them, and it's never all the time. So we always have this problem of trying to continue being human beings and being spiritual beings. What we'd like would be to get rid of the human part and take up the spiritual. But what we're faced with is the problem of how to be both at once. So this is what Tōzan is dealing with here, and what he's confused about. Yunyan answers Tōzan's confession by asking another question. He says, "What have you done? What are these residual habits?" he wants to know that you have. To me, this question sounds a little panicky, like, oh my God, what kind of stuff is he into? Is there something serious here that I have to deal with? Something that I don't know about? Maybe he's assaulting the little boy monks, consorting with prostitutes, or stealing money from the Dharma box. Yunyan doesn't know. But it's not anything like that Tōzan is thinking of. He replies, "I don't even practice the holy truths." So when I remember when I wrote this talk, I looked that up online, holy truths, to see, if it was referring to something specific. And I didn't get any enlightenment about that online. But I think that given the context here, what he's talking about is the precepts. So he's worried about the ordinary Buddhist inability to live up to the do's and don'ts of the precepts. The precepts are the moral and ethical teachings of Zen. Do not kill, be generous, so on and so forth. And no one keeps them 100%, as much as we might try, because they're very daunting. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but it means we won't succeed to be always on point with the precepts. Is this, it sort of parallels the Bible, which says, "For the good that I would do, I do not. But the evil which I would not do, that I do." So despite our good intentions, we don't always do what we would like to do in following the precepts. So Yunyan tries to put Dangshan's mind at rest. He asks what I consider a very remarkable question in the annals of Zen. He says, "Are you happy?" I don't even imagine the traditional stern taskmaster Zen master asking that question to their students, you know. I think some teachers don't really care if their students are happy or not. So this is his attempt to raise a more crucial question with Tōzan about his residual habits. It may seem odd to ask this question, but it also seems fruitful. Why does he ask, and what does it mean to be happy? For me, a better word than happy might be joyful. Are you joyful? Do you feel joy? You know, I think I prefer joy because the word happy and happiness has been kind of devalued in our culture and cheapened in a way. It seems to point to something a little more superficial than joy. So what kind of life is Dangshan, is Yunyan pointing to here? He's trying to get Tōzan past his preoccupation with all the things he thinks are wrong with him, all his faults. He's trying to get Tōzan to ask a deeper question about his life. Yunyan wants to know, are you fully alive? Do you find the world rich and interesting? Can you love others? Can you accept love and help and praise from others? Can you give to others? Can you be tolerant and humorous about yourself despite the remaining imperfections? Are you okay with yourself and your life despite the fact that neither is just the way you'd like it? Are you able to be vulnerable? The kind of vulnerability necessary here is the kind that means you can recognize and feel fully all kinds of emotions, hurts and pleasures. We have to be aware of our faults and avoidances, but then we have to move on. This is what Tōzan is not doing. He's kind of holding on to his imperfections. We try to love with more compassion and attention, but we have to learn to forgive ourselves when we can't do it. The time will come when our compassion just doesn't extend. Maybe we're having a bad day. Maybe the situation in front of us is so repulsive to us we just can't extend anything good there. We need happiness and joy as well as an awareness of life's suffering and difficulties. If we stay stuck in trying to be better in the self-improvement process, then we will always fall short because there'll always be something left to improve. We'll always have to apologize for ourselves, and we'll always need to try harder. This leaves us in a kind of breathless race to measure up to our own standards. We have a sense of never being good enough. And this is not a very comfortable way to live. And it's not likely to attract others to the Zen path. It's our joy, our happiness, our humor, our warmth, our gaiety, our full presence and vulnerability. These reward us and make others wonder about this Zen practice we have. You know, my teacher, Barry Magid, always has sessions at Garrison, and were doing our session one day, and we always do the meal chants at our table. And when we're there are always other Zen groups there as well. So we hear their chants as well, which are slightly different than ours. So one day we're eating lunch, it's very, very quiet because the meals are in silence, and the group comes in, they plunk themselves down at the table and they start to do their chant. And it sounds the most lugubrious thing you've ever heard. And it's all this very highfalutin Zen language and everything. It hasn't ever been like translated into really idiomatic language. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, and not to be ageist, but they're all over 80. I myself am pushing 80, but still. And so at the next meal, Barry announces, we're changing the meal chants. And where we say, let us, what's the line? Let us something our meal together.
Yeah, he put the word enjoy in it.
Yeah, let us enjoy. He replaced a word with enjoy, so now we have to say, let us enjoy our food together. I know Barry very well, and I knew exactly that he had the same experience that I had with this other group, and that's why he had changed it. So when I went into interview, I asked him, and he said, yep, that's exactly right. So, to the question of whether he's happy, what does Tōzan say? He says yes. To me, that yes is very poignant. It reverberates over thousands of years to the present. I so wanted him to say yes. I wanted him to be happy, and I want each of you to be happy too. But his answer still has certain elements in it which seem a little confused. He says, it's as though I have found a jewel in a trash heap. This is a fairly common Buddhist metaphor. The jewel is your essential nature, your enlightenment in this gross body. So he says it's as though I found a jewel in a trash heap. So he has the jewel, the realization, he says he's happy, but he also still thinks in terms of humanity as a trash heap. He still thinks the human condition is a throwaway condition, a worthless, soiled condition. Another Zen saying is, Buddha has no hands but ours. The way we embody this practice is in our body. So if we don't have a human life, we're useless. We can't act in the world. We might have compassion, but we can't express it. So the human body is very important, and not to be called a heap of trash. This particular, conversation and story ends right there, but later on in the account of Tōzan's life, we have a further story about Tōzan. He has come to understand his connection, his oneness with the highest spiritual values, and this frees him from worry about his humanness. Let me read you this little part. It's short. So it says, Tōzan still had some doubts. But later, he was greatly enlightened when he saw his reflection in the water as he crossed the river. You can imagine how that would happen. He looks down, he sees himself in the river, and he realizes it's just a kind of image. It's empty. There's nothing, and that's not real. It's an illusion, a delusion. And being a good Zen student, he immediately thinks, oh, this is only a delusion and an illusion too. So he could equate the two. So he had a big enlightenment experience seeing his reflection in the river. It says, then he understood the meaning of what had gone before. He said in verse, you can see him stopping on the bridge and composing a poem. And this is what he wrote. He said, don't seek from others, or you'll be estranged from yourself. I now go on alone. Everywhere I encounter it, it now is me. I now am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with being as it is. Tōzan's life study was now accomplished, and he was free from lingering doubts. And this was how it came about. Sounds like a little fairy tale, doesn't it? So he says, everywhere I encounter it, it's not a scarce commodity. You know, in our evening chant, we say, the great way lies beneath our feet, extending freely in every direction. You're never apart from it. But you have to realize that. He goes on to say, it is now me. He knows that he's perfect and complete. It is now me. Buddha nature is now me. He also knows I now am not it. I am it, but it's much bigger than I am, and it's not just me, it's the rest of the universe as well. It includes everything. This, he says, is merging with being as it is. And then the story says his study was now accomplished, and he was free from lingering doubts. Doubts vanish when we realize we in all creation are already it. And we don't have to strive to get something we don't have, to be something we aren't. We don't have to be perfect to be enlightened. Didn't the Buddha say at the time of his enlightenment, I and all sentient beings are inherently Buddha? Inherently. It means it's part of us. It's not something we have to go searching for. The purpose of your Zen practice is not to make you happy. And if you approach it in this way, in a sort of transactional way, saying I'll do this and then I'll be happy, it's sure not to work. But if you can practice hard and sincerely, your happiness might just be a byproduct of your practice. So in conclusion, I ask, are you happy?